Communitech helps founders start, grow, and succeed. Our members raise 19% more capital, raise more rounds, hold more patents, and have an increased financial velocity. Communitech member companies scale faster than anywhere else in Canada. So if you're not a Communitech member yet, let's fix that. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining today's Ask Me Anything session on cybersecurity and the benefits of ISO 27001. I'm Erin Warner, Membership Specialist at Communitech. Before we get started, I have a few reminders for today's event. This session is being recorded so that it can be shared as a resource for our founders to reference later. You can find all of our past AMA recordings at communitech.ca. We have a great speaker for today's session, so please, if you're interested in following up after today's session to discuss this topic further, we'll be sending out BDC's contact info in a follow-up email, or you can always connect with your Communitech FSM and they can connect you accordingly. Please check out our newsletters for a list of upcoming AMAs. So we do have one more planned for the month of March. Next week, we will be hosting the Playbook for Successful Storytelling in the US market. So please join us for that. And with that, I will introduce today's speakers. So we have Rauda Mohammed with us. Rauda helps entrepreneurs improve the foundations of their business by implementing quality management systems, food safety programs, and operational efficiency initiatives. As a former professional engineer, Rauda brings over 15 years of industry experience in production and consulting. She offers hands-on experience for entrepreneurs looking to improve process effectiveness, enhance customer satisfaction, and deliver high-quality, safe products with a mindset to protecting their business investment and staging future growth. Her guiding principle is that an organization centered on quality will always meet and exceed customer expectations, and more importantly, beat the competition. An award-winning poet, Rauda is passionate about language, the world of the spoken word, and bringing a bit of finely wrought humor to the world of business blogging. She also conducts poetry workshops for youth around the GTA. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Rauda.
Thanks, Erin. Welcome, everyone. So I'm just going to start my screen share. Really looking forward to the session with everybody. Let's hope my technology cooperates. I'm assuming, Erin, you can see?
We can see it.
Great. All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your precious day to come and have a discussion around cybersecurity and the benefits of ISO. So we've got a fairly packed, but hopefully insightful and valuable agenda for you today. And really just to kind of give you an idea about who I am and a little bit about what I do. I'm going to go and do a really quick introduction around the BDC, starting off there. But the agenda today is really going to run us through just a bit of a context for Canadian SMEs and the challenges that they face with respect to addressing cybersecurity risk, developing cybersecurity management systems, setting proper objectives that are still valuable for their business while also dealing with lots of emerging risks. And then we're going to get really into the world of ISO 27001 and its benefits in helping SMEs deal with some of the challenges that we're going to be talking about. So before we get started, as I said, a little bit about BDC. And so if you take a look, we're very proud to be Canada's first certified B Corp bank. We are Canada's national bank for entrepreneurs. We have a complementary role played by financial institutions in the private sector. So we are a profitable entity operating at no cost to the Canadian taxpayer, and our sole shareholder is the Government of Canada. We offer a variety of services and solutions around financing, capital, and advisory services. We focus particularly on the SME segment of the Canadian economy because that's where the largest number of businesses lie, and we feel that that's where we can have the fullest effect on the economy. So let's get started. If we take a look at cybersecurity, why are we even talking about it? What's so important about it? And really, why should you even care to spend your time here today? But then also going back to your businesses and hopefully acting on some of the items we discussed. Essentially, if you've been looking around and seeing everything that's been on the news, you'll realize that cybersecurity is essentially a non-negotiable business imperative. No company, large or small, wants to suffer a major breach or disruption of business, right? Attacks against Canadian SMEs have been increasing, and if we kind of take a look at the actual level of disruption to business, if the pandemic had not occurred, cybersecurity would have been the single biggest business disruptor over the past 2 years. That kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. What we want to do is that learn some lessons from some of the challenges of other businesses, so that you feel empowered and motivated to go back to your businesses and make some improvements. The importance of these lessons is really twofold. Number one, they really are applicable to your own real life situation. They're highly instructive, but also they're a way to kind of get some shortcuts when it comes to implementing cybersecurity. All right, so just keep that in mind. When we take a look at the scope of some of the concerns around cybersecurity, cybercrime, attacks, things like that, there is some really sobering stats. And I won't bore you with too many of them, but these are some really important ones that came out of a quite a large study that BDC did last year on digital maturity in the SME space. And when we talk about small firms, we're talking about businesses with fewer than 100 employees, and medium firms are between 100 to about 499. And really, the scale of attacks have gone, really unsubsided over the past 12 months. About 16% of small firms saying that they have been the target of at least one type of cyber attack. There are instances where there are multiple attacks, and the same thing can be said about the 28% of medium-sized firms that have, reported some kind of a cyber attack over the past 12 months or so. And where there was an reported attack, there was a minimum cost of at least $50,000 arising out of either the disruption to business, the loss of data, any ransoms that might have been paid, and any regulatory fines or penalties that might have occurred or accrued according to the particular context. And you might be wondering, why this heightened level of focus, and why are the bad guys targeting Canadian businesses so heavily? There's really a lot of things, or a lot of factors that come into play, but just to kind of give you an idea of the cyber risk factors, right? So the more internet connected assets an organization has, the greater the level of cyber threat it's going to face, right? Targeting of industrial processes and ransomware attacks have become fairly common, resulting in major impacts, including, the disruption to business, the loss of operations, and things like that. But the typical Canadian SME really has many of these risk factors, if not all of them. And unfortunately, what that means for the attackers, these companies have a lot of valuable information, a lot of valuable assets that are vulnerable to some degree or another. And so the question then becomes, how are Canadian SMEs also viewed from the perspective of their ability to pay? And unfortunately, they're also seen as being, quite cash rich. And so having the means to pay if in the event of a cyber breach or some sort of an attack being successful in either disrupting the business or making off with some really sensitive information. So just keep that in mind. The vulnerabilities arise from the number of sort of risk factors, but also the propensity to have the funds to pay to get out of a bit of a sticky situation. So if we take a look at sort of like what are some of the impacts, we keep talking about cyber breaches and loss of business, but there are a whole host, quite a plethora of impacts, right? The obvious ones, you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, the financial risk, right? But and a little bit of a strategic risk as well. right? If your company's name, gets splashed across the media, whether you're a small or large company these days, these stories tend to get out, then you might be seen as a bit of a vulnerable type of a company to do business with. Your employees might also be concerned about their own, personal data that you might be holding, and so on. But if you kind of take a look at the left side of the screen, there's really a whole bunch of impacts that could come out of a cybersecurity breach. And when you take a look, there's the regulatory risk, right? So if you're caught in a situation when there is now exposure of your customers or your employees' data, and you are somehow found negligent, there are fines and penalties that exist. But there's also things like health and safety risks, right? So if and these are real life examples, hackers take control of production equipment, that actually poses physical real world risks to your employees, and even to the environment if some of the production equipment is handling or processing potentially hazardous materials. Reputational damage, that obviously goes without saying. How many of us have had, unfortunately, that sinking feeling when a major credit card provider, for example, quite recently in Canada's own history, had to make that announcement that a significant number of its customers' data had been stolen, and that they were going to be notifying those customers. I unfortunately had to raise my hand when I got that letter, and I've never monitored my credit report and my credit score as closely as I have since that day. And am I going to do business with that particular credit card company again? Never. It's just once you kind of have been burned, you kind of move away from that, and that sort of can be quite monumental when we look at the context of a small and medium-sized enterprise, right? Multinationals may have the resources to weather some kind of a cyber attack that really impinges on their reputation. But think about the startup company. Think about the company that's still sort of in early stages and it has like maybe, I don't know, 10 employees, maybe $2 to $3 million of annual revenues. These are typical BDC client numbers. These costs can tend to add up. What we also don't often find that we overlook, because it's hard to quantify, is really the value of business disruption, right? What does it actually cost a company when it does not have access to its assets and its information in particular, right? How many days of downtime can a typical business survive before things get really out of hand and it is no longer able to operate? At the same time, there are instances where catastrophic results have arisen, and within about a period of 4 to 6 months, some studies have shown that quite a number of smaller businesses have actually had to close their doors because of the severity of a cyber attack that they suffered. When we take a look at the scale, now you've got an idea of the impacts. The attacks against SMEs in particular are highly targeted. Most recent numbers show anywhere from about 57% increase to over 200%, depending on the geography that you're looking at. Much higher amounts of money are being stolen in electronic fund transfer scams, and the average ransomware demand has gone up by 3 times. So again, where are these numbers coming from? Those cyber risk factors in sort of the cash potential that Canadian businesses have in the eyes of their attackers. And this particular slide is quite scary when you consider who the publishing entity is, right? This is an insurance claims center, and they do research, and you'll see what has happened in the insurance space is that premiums are starting to get a little bit more expensive. And again, to today's point of discussion, insurance providers, cybersecurity insurance providers, I should say, are starting to ask their clients about their cybersecurity programs. So it's no longer a theoretical thing. There are some real life business costs of not investing in formal mechanisms to protect the information in your business. Now, when we take a look at some of the most common cyber attacks, I know everyone wants to know about these, but really there's nothing here that should surprise anybody, right? Malware, compromised credentials, phishing, all tend to be sort of like the top three. They're constantly jostling for space on the podium, but this is where the bulk of the breaches tend to come from. For example, compromised credentials is about 20% of breaches, right? People don't really think about how important it is to keep credentials safe, and obviously not to be reusing usernames and passwords. We hear that oftentimes, to the point where we kind of stop paying attention to it. But the bad actors are definitely exploiting some of those human propensities to kind of cut corners when it comes to cybersecurity. Again, supply chain vulnerabilities is something that has really emerged, particularly as a result of the pandemic, as being one of the main ways that attackers are really getting a lot of payoff, I would say, for their efforts, where they're essentially going island hopping. So they attack one company, get access to its customer or supplier data. There's obviously interconnectedness between businesses these days, obviously because of the digital transformation, and they use that knowledge or that information that they've stolen from one company to then attack other businesses within its ecosystem. And so what they've also understood and have exploited to a great degree is that the vulnerabilities of most small and medium-sized enterprises are fairly well known, and they tend to be quite repeatable or quite repeated or unaddressed across the board, right? So the sort of like the level of cyber vigilance, for example, in a particular segment or a particular sector is fairly fairly well understood, I would say, by the attackers, and so they're able to get more than one victim, unfortunately, for the sort of campaign that they might be waging. Again, supply chain vulnerabilities really came up quite high on the list. When you look at various reports by IBM or Cisco last year, about a 44% increase in supply chain vulnerabilities. And another type of sort of cyber attack is really the concept of double extortion. So I think everyone kind of understands, the bad guys will lock up your systems and demand a payment, usually in some sort of a cryptocurrency, for access back to your systems and your data. Well, criminal ingenuity, obviously, in this case, has no limits. And so what they've done is they will exfiltrate your data prior to encrypting your systems. And so now they're holding both your systems and your data hostage. And the threat that comes along with this is, if you don't pay, well, we've already got your data, we're going to start leaking it, it's going to embarrass you, your customers are going to be angry, and you're going to be stuck in this situation where you did not do the right thing, quote unquote, by paying the ransom. Depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, paying a ransom in a ransomware attack might actually be illegal. So they're really exploiting the vulnerable situation that business finds itself in, right? And that's really just to enhance their chance of being paid the ransom. There are instances where once they've stolen data and encrypted the systems, that the attackers have actually contacted members of the media and said, hey, did you know company so-and-so has been the victim of a cyber, or has been the target of a cyber attack, and their data is going to be leaked just to cause further embarrassment and really to pressure the leaders of the business. And also, a company that is well positioned on the cybersecurity front might be able to recover its systems right away and get back into business and all of those things. But then what do you do about the data that's already been stolen? And this is something that's becoming quite frequent. And unfortunately, there's once it happens, there are very few avenues. Obviously, you have to report this to the leadership within the business. You have to report it to affected parties. There might be regulatory requirements to make disclosures and things like that. But once it's already happened, there are very few options of getting that data back. And there was a very, very sad case of a health tech company in Norway, where very sensitive mental health data had been stolen from this company that facilitated online counseling sessions. And the attackers basically said, we are going to publish people's mental health data, very private conversations that they had with their therapists, and they made good on that. They had released a few people's records, and so they were extorting the patients, or the clients in this case, and the company itself. And unfortunately, what ended up happening was that through a series of really further unfortunate events, the company ended up going out of business, and the ownership and the leadership team facing some significant penalties, because part of the investigation led back to poor management of cybersecurity. So it was one thing that the attackers were doing, their side of the bad stuff, but the company's management had also been found to be negligent. And so that brings me to my next slide. And it's really about, there are some very real world challenges for managing cybersecurity in the SME space, right? How are you going to balance your digital adoption, making sure that you're taking advantage of the latest and greatest technology, while also maintaining a responsible approach to cybersecurity? You also want to take a look at the fact that, the amount of risks that are out there, the variety of risks, the sheer volume of risk, and also even the sophistication of some of the attacks compared to the resources that are available to your typical Canadian SME. There's quite a monumental disparity in a lot of cases. Because of those two things, now SMEs are in the situation where they don't really have a lot of clarity on which areas of their business do they focus on, which technologies do they invest in, what platforms do they, or products do they avoid, those kinds of things. The flip side of that, point number 3, is really sometimes there's now the running to technology to be the fix, while forgetting that business processes and people's behaviors within the business also have an impact on how, on the cyber resilience of a business. All of this is significantly sort of underscored by the fact that there is a big shortage of skilled experts when it comes to cybersecurity, and we're talking about people with the technical skills to put up the defenses, to be able to stop an attack or detect an attack before it's even started, and be able to help a business recover. So it's quite a bit of a dire situation when you put all of these factors together. However, I've got some really good news for you, otherwise we wouldn't be here today. The best response really for businesses is to shift to risk-based management. And I can't stress this enough, because you can't be hyper vigilant on all fronts. Number one, that's just monumentally costly, but it's also quite inefficient, right? Every company has a particular risk profile, for example, and it needs to understand, what level of risk it's willing to live with, given the knowledge, or given the fact that you cannot bring risk, or all risk, to a level of 0. So it's important that while the company is developing its cybersecurity system, that it's still allowing the business to experience the full benefits of its investment in technology, and that you're not overdoing it, right? So you've got to identify your risk. You've got to analyze what they mean for yourself, for the stakeholders in your business, your customers, your employees, regulators, things like that, and then come up with a rational way of quantifying that risk, and then also the measures that you need to do in order to put in place in order to mitigate them. So what does this actually mean for you? Very, very basically, what it means is that you should conduct a risk assessment, and figure out, what is the true value of your information systems and assets. What are the technologies that you have? What are the vulnerabilities that they may be susceptible to, and then come up with sort of that understanding of what levels of risk you are willing to live with, which ones you don't want to are not willing to live with, and you absolutely need to completely and thoroughly mitigate. And then you come up with formal mechanisms so that you are effectively dealing with those risks in the way that you've designed or desired. And then what you do is you've got to create some clear but strong policies and procedures and the do's and don'ts of cybersecurity, and then also come up with a way to manage an incident, because some kind of an incident with respect to cybersecurity will happen. That's just a fact of life. What you also want to do is validate the effectiveness of your efforts, right? So you don't just sit on your own laurels, or you don't just, kind of not go outside and learn a little bit more and continually improve. So you've got to validate and also continually improve. So that brings us to the question of, okay, so what do we do about cybersecurity objectives? How do we set them up? And one really simple rule of thumb is setting cybersecurity objectives are really no different. Is really no different than setting other management objectives. And this is where key management concepts and frameworks will really help you. At a high level, what you want to do is you take a look at the main factors within your business, right? People are the heart and mind of your business. Your processes are absolutely vital to this discussion, as well as the data and your technology. So for your business to operate at peak performance and to deliver the business value that you want, while also acting responsibly on the cybersecurity side, it's important to define a limited number of cybersecurity objectives at first, and then iterate along the way, right? Do not go for perfection 100% off the bat. It's probably not going to be feasible with respect to the resources you have, and B, it's going to be quite exhausting. And C, what will end up happening is, as a result of that exhaustion, people are just going to give up, and then you're really not going to get the value that you hope to realize. So you want to strike a balance between the effort required to develop and implement and sustain your cybersecurity measures and objectives, and also the benefits that they're going to deliver. And when we talk about benefits, we don't just mean benefits to your customers, for example, or your business partners. We're also talking about benefits to your own people, right? Your employees, your staff, contractors, what have you. They've also got to see the value in them undertaking and supporting you in this process. So really, very straightforward 4-step approach, and this works all the time. We work with SMEs day in and day out, and this is a process that's really been quite effective for all of them. You want to identify your stakeholders and the risk, right? So what start off with your customers, that's the obvious one, but you also want to take a look at your employees, right? If you don't have any other stakeholder, but you have employees, they are your stakeholder when it comes to protecting their confidential and private and sensitive data. It's really, really important. So take a look at them, enumerate who your stakeholders are, and put yourself in their shoes and say, what would they expect from our business as a reliable business partner, but also one that is showing commitment to preserving the security and privacy of the information that they're sharing with us. And then you do your risk assessment. Coming out of that risk assessment, you now will know what areas of the business you need to strengthen, others where, give yourself a pat on the back and you continue doing as is with the eye to obviously continual improvement, and areas where, maybe you need to learn a little bit more. So you create your controls, and these are the measures, these are the policies, these are the do's and don'ts that now everyone within the business is going to be made aware of, going to be trained on, and also going to be responsible for maintaining. And it's important that that information around the controls is shared with everyone, because now you want to establish the culture of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is not just the responsibility of the IT team or the CISO or the tech people or your managed services provider. It is the responsibility of everybody. And the more people are contributing harmoniously and with due vigilance, the better the chances are of all of this work actually helping to reduce your exposure to potential cyber attacks. And then last but not least, continually monitoring and improving. And when we talk about continuous monitoring and improving, we're talking about the technology side of things. So making sure that you're obviously doing technology tech stack refreshes, making sure that you're on top of patch management and looking at any new products that you bring in, and not kind of taking them without investigating what sort of vulnerabilities they may already have, but also measuring your own progress against yourself, right? Some really obvious things you can kind of do are on the next slide. So you want these objectives to be specific and measurable. They have to be relevant to your business, otherwise they're not going to have any meaning for anybody. So you might want to set yourself out to say, hey, we want to have our firewall stop 100% of unwanted network traffic. Well, this is pretty specific and this is measurable. And so you go about your exercise, you put your controls in place, and then you see, did we do that? It also gives you the idea of whether or not the objective you set is actually attainable with the knowledge, the tools, and the resources that you have. You might be a little bit more general and say, overall at the cybersecurity management system, we want to reduce the number of security incidents by 50%. And you could define security incidents being, the number of employees that click on what is clearly a phishing email, right? Or it could be, in terms of just vulnerabilities that you've already looked at before and that you believe you've patched, making sure that that thing is not recurring. Same thing with employee training. You might want to set some objectives there. Actually, the recent study by BDC showed that only about 55% of companies actually are investing in proper employee training. And again, not to blame your people, but human behavior and human error has a significant role in the success of your cybersecurity efforts. And then you might want to do other things like looking at the technology products you bring into your business to improve operations, efficiency, things like that. A lot of them, inadvertently come with default vulnerabilities. Do you investigate these products? Do you make sure that you deactivate, these settings, or do you kind of just take them just without any sort of due diligence, right? What about if someone leaves the company and they had, system access rights? Do you have a standard or an objective where, you make sure that 100% of their access rights have been disabled within X hours of their departure? Just some things that, every business can give some consideration to. So this actually brings us to why ISO 27001 should be a consideration for you. Just at a high level, it's really a combination of policies and procedures for organizations to use. It gives you a framework that is going to be quite effective, allows you to be systematic and cost effective in terms of not only adopting a cybersecurity management approach, but also making sure that you're able to sustain it. And so the framework in itself is really, it centers your stakeholders and your business operations, your processes, your technology. So it's right sized for the business that you are today. And the basic approach that it takes is it says, you need to be able to identify your information assets, and then you need to be able to come up with ways to detect and contain a cybersecurity incident, and obviously where you can to prevent these things from happening in the first place. The basic goal of ISO is really to help you, to protect the three main aspects of information, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And when you take a look at the actual domains of control within ISO, it starts off with everything from setting appropriate information security policies, looking at how information security is organized. It looks at your human resource practices and the implications that they pose for cybersecurity. Again, when you bring in or hire a new employee, what do you have a consideration around cybersecurity training when you bring them on board? Do they have, do's and don'ts? Are you going to be allowing them to bring their own devices? What does that mean for you? On and on. Right? And it takes a look at asset management. And when it comes to asset management, the controls really are about, protecting, processing devices, storage devices, and making sure that responsibilities for their security are designated, and that people know how to handle them according to sort of like predefined classification levels, right? Access control, again, this is about both physical as well as logical access. There are controls around cryptography, around confidentiality, authenticity, and the integrity of information, and of course protecting the physical environment, right? Very, very important to take into consideration the layout of your facility. Where are CCTV cameras? Where is confidential information readily available just by somebody walking through your business? Related to that, operation security. So this is making sure that the IT systems themselves, the operating systems, the software, things like that are secure against theft and loss, and so on and so on, right? With respect to communications, looking at a very big important one is supplier relationships, and of course incident management and business continuity. Two very, very important things that I think a lot of businesses have understood as a result of the pandemic. And last but not least, compliance. And this is compliance with both your customers' expectations in terms of the contractual obligations you have to them, but also in terms of regulatory requirements depending on the jurisdiction in which you're doing business. And so when it comes to implementing ISO, you'll see that it's not just situating cybersecurity in technical controls or technological efforts alone. There are organizational controls, legal controls, physical ones, as well as HR ones, which I've just outlined. So again, the shift is around risk management and identifying the appropriate levels of risk that you want to manage. And you can't just situate your responses only on technical controls. It requires effort across the organization. So what do you do now that you've kind of got that grounding a little bit in the ISO? Very straightforward. Identify, assess, and manage the risks associated with your people, the processes, the procedures of the premises, and the technology. And what that means is you're going to have some well-defined procedures around things that you need to do. A formal information security management program, obviously investing in malware protection, staff training, making sure that you're on top of patch management, that you've got proper handle on supply chain risks, right? Are certain members of your vendor group or suppliers do they exist in a sector that has had some recent sort of catastrophic incidents? Food and beverage processing, the meat industry in particular has been targeted. The energy sector has been targeted, both very, very large as well as very, very small businesses in those sectors. So once you do that, you'll have a better understanding of your risk profile. And then looking at the people, the process, and technology. So making sure that people have a good relationship with not just the technology, but also the security environment that you're asking them to come to work every day, right? And so that they have the right tools and the right processes to manage cybersecurity for the business, its customers, its suppliers, themselves as employees, while they go about and they do their work and add value to the business. And making sure that that training is not sort of event oriented, that it's ongoing, and that people have an opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge. So at BDC, one of the things that we really do very, very well as part of our own InfoSec program are continual phishing simulations, for example. There are, there are some competitions where we team up, at the local business center level or regional level, and we go through a series of InfoSec trials. Those are a combination of sort of training seminars as well as exercises that we kind of have to navigate through, through various scenarios. And because of the repetition of that, we've seen a much better adherence to our cybersecurity policies, but also better understanding and a better ability to proactively identify and report instances where BDC itself might be under attack. And then finally, you want to measure, right? You want to really understand kind of like, are you tracking how often and how quickly we do our updates and our patches? Have you tracked your response times where there have been instances where an attack has happened? How long did it take you to figure out that was going on? And what did you do and how quickly were you able to assemble your team, get a plan of action and things like that? And then last but not least, obviously you want to continually improve. A big part of your ISO program or any cybersecurity program really is around having a cyber incidents response plan. So you've done all of the good stuff, you've trained your people, you've put all the good measures in place, you're proactively monitoring your systems, but an incident happens. What do you do? What's the core team, and do they have defined roles and responsibilities? And very importantly, have they tested those in sort of like mock sort of incident response exercises? That's really, really important, because a recent study by IBM showed that that companies that invest in and then also test their incident response plans were able to lower the cost of data breaches by about 55%. And the top end of the cost of a data breach, according to this report, for Canadian businesses was about $2.5 million. Again, it will vary, but if you were able to save, 55% of $1, it doesn't go to the bad guys or cost you in terms of recovery from the damage done by the attacker, then it's worthwhile. And then last but not least, I cannot stress this enough. SMEs in particular are not going to be able to hire all of the cybersecurity expertise that they will ever need, nor should they. There's a business case to be made, and a very strong one, I believe, that they should invest in cybersecurity as a service. Modern cyber threats require modern cyber tech and expertise. This sounds like it might be cost prohibitive, but security as a service can offer a more attainable route where companies are able to realize the security benefits of the latest technology as well as the most up-to-date expertise. So, consider a managed security service provider where you're outsourcing management of security devices and systems, and they're doing everything from software updates, access control, managing your firewalls, intrusion detection, and of course vulnerability scanning, and also helping you deal with the response to an incident, right? And the value of investing in this is that you have 24/7 support, right? So that you're not relying on your employees, who at some point have to go home, to maintain this vigilance. It also reduces the cost for you to find, hire, train, and maintain people, so that you can have that acceptable cybersecurity posture. And then finally, when we take a look at the benefits, I think over the course of the presentation so far, the benefits are pretty self-explanatory. But if I were to capture all of them in a very, very short way, it would be it allows you to approach cybersecurity based on the risks inherent to your own business. So there isn't a one size fits all. It's not a prescriptive approach. It's really about business management. And because of that, it's a very pragmatic and performance based standard so that you're able to continually improve and measure yourself. It's applicable to any size, any type of organization, because it doesn't come in with presumptions about the resources or the level of expertise available within a business. Because of the risk-based approach, what it does is it gives you opportunity for productivity with your cybersecurity dollars, which are often quite constrained, right? There's studies that have shown that Canadian SMEs have very lean IT budgets, and the cybersecurity portion of those IT budgets is often quite minuscule, right? So having a systematic framework on how to best deploy those very valuable budgets is key as well. And then last but not least, and very importantly, it's an internationally accepted standard with global, obviously with global market recognition, right? So it is actually going to impart quite a bit of value to your brand, and also to reassuring your customers, your existing customers, but also attracting new ones. And so it actually does offer a competitive advantage. Don't take our word for it. A recent Cisco report showed that 90% of companies that were surveyed said that they would look at information security certifications such as ISO 27001 when selecting vendors or products. So this is something that is only going to increase. The vast majority of clients that we help on the ISO 27,000 side of things come to us because they've already been asked by their customers, if you want to be an approved vendor or an approved supplier, you need to have some sort of a cybersecurity certification. And 27,001 is just one of the ones that they're asked for. There are other things like the NIST standard, and the CMMC when it comes to companies in the defense supply chain, and dealing with things like GDPR and all of that. But what you want to do is make sure that you review the elements of ISO 27001 and see where it can best help you manage the risks associated with your business. And so we want to conclude, you want to move from sort of trying to be hyper vigilant on every front of your business to more timely risk-based decision making. You want to be focused on business outcomes and not letting an imbalance occur between the cybersecurity measures and the ability for you to generate business, to keep your employees happy, and also to be able to do business with when it comes to your customers and your suppliers. You also want to invest in your people, because there are limits to technology, and depending on what study you look at, the human factor to cyber attacks or cyber breaches is quite high. It's not always because people are negligent or they don't care about doing the right thing. Oftentimes it's lack of training, it's lack of awareness, and it's also lack of tools and resources. So definitely invest in your people. Understand the limits of technology, right? Seems very obvious, but there might be some learnings there for a lot of SMEs, just to particularly those that are kind of ramping up on their digital adoption, that technology, like many things, it's got its pros and cons, right? And you have to sort of evaluate those pros and cons and say, okay, what new risks is this bringing into my business, and how am I going to be living with this, or what do I need to do to mitigate it if obviously the risk level is too high. Very importantly, investing in detection and response, right? So it's not enough to just build a great system. You have to actively be monitoring, and then of course investing in continual improvement, because the digital transformation is not going to end, and unfortunately the cybersecurity risks of that transformation are also going to continue to exist. But if you take a look at what ISO and other standards have to offer, you'll have a good pathway to that continual improvement. And so now I guess we'll just take a pause and move on to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Rada. I know that I have learned a lot that I didn't know previous to this session. So there's definitely a lot of knowledge in that presentation. It was great. We do just have 5 minutes left, so I want to get to the questions that had come in through the registration. The first one that we have is, how are ISO certification bodies accredited?
Right. So the national accreditation body is Standards Council Canada, and it's responsible for accrediting any of the certification bodies that operate in Canada. So SCC is the organization to go and check. They do keep a registry of accredited certification bodies. So if you see a name there, if you see a company out there that says it's an ISO certification body or auditor, double check with Standards Council Canada.
Great. And I'll also just mention, if you do have any last minute questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them. The second one that we had come through was, how does ISO 27001 deal with cloud storage? So things like Google Cloud, Microsoft, and what are the best practices for managing sensitive information when using digital project management platforms like Asana or Trello?
Yeah, so there are some standards that there are ISO standards that give you guidance on protection of privacy in cloud environments. So you want to take a look at the framework from ISO 27018 and 27017 as well. The general approach there from 27001 is it wants you to do a risk assessment on that platform or that technology, and for you to decide what are the acceptable and unacceptable levels of risk that this particular product poses to your customers, your employees, and so on, and for then you to come up with a rationale on how you're going to be dealing with those risks. So because it's such an open standards and an open framework, two businesses using the exact mix of technologies might come up with completely different responses based on their operations and their own risk appetite, for example. Also, the kind of data that's going to be, either residing in these platforms or that's going to be being processed in these platforms.
And how much does it cost to get ISO 27001 certified?
Right. So auditing fees are based on the size of the organization and the scope of your ISO system. There is about a daily rate of about $2,000 to $2,500, depending on the firm, and your audit days could be anywhere from 5 to 7 days. So that's just a rough rule of thumb for the auditing fees.
Okay. And I'll give you our last question here. So for a small company that already NIST 7621, what approximate costs range should be expected to implement ISO? So I don't know if that's different from what you had previously mentioned, or if it differs with that previous system.
Yeah, so NIST standards and the ISO framework they have the same objectives. So if you're working against a NIST standard, you really will have quite a number of the controls that ISO 27000 wants you to take a look at. So it's not going to be a whole monumental shift. There are differences in terms and sort of the structure that they look for. But a lot of these standards have quite a bit of harmony in what they're asking you to do. And many of the standards also have published comparison guides to show where their controls overlap and where they differ. So you should definitely take a look for one of those things as well.
Great, thank you so much. If anyone else has any other questions, we did run out of. Feel free to either connect with Mallory. We'll send out her info in our follow-up email, or you can connect with your Communitech FSM. So I just wanted to give a huge thank you to Rauda. It was so much information that you provided, and we will see you all next week.